welcome back to the Pennsylvania Berwind. This is episode number 18, and welcome to phase 2 of this build. Thank you for joining me once again, and you'll have to excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. My voice may be a little bit raspy, and I might have to pause here and there, so I'm trying to get this video out sort of on time for you guys, but that's whatever. We're here to talk about this build, and I'm gonna be totally open and transparent with you guys. I really struggled to get started with this build, and I've been kind of like in a existential rut, so to speak, just getting started on some of these things. I'll talk about that in a minute, but the first thing I want to talk about is this is Huskins Gravel, and this is going to be the first build on phase 2, and we are just outside of the Babcock mine, so we're a little bit outside of the phase 1 border, and I think going forward what I'm going to be doing is my builds in a little bit more of a linear style. If there's one thing that I learned from phase 1, it's that I can't just jump around and do these design elements here and there and then try to connect the dots later, because that leaves a lot of work that I kind of just don't want to do. Like all of the mainline track scenery and that sort of thing. So I'm going to try to complete these sections cohesively in a linear fashion, so that way they all connect as I build them, and I don't have to go back and try and fill in the gaps later on. And that'll also help me kind of stay on track with what assets I'm using and just kind of keep a little bit more of a continuity to the scenes and the scenery and stuff like that. It might help me be a little bit more motivated to move on to the next scene and so on and so forth. So I didn't do it at the end of this video necessarily, like I didn't go back out onto the main line and start working our way onto what the next build is going to be. I'll probably do some of that off camera. This build, I got kind of hung up with it, but that's another story. I'll talk about it another day. But anyway, so this is a big gravel pit, and it was a bit challenging to get started with because as a lot of my builds are, these are not places that I have ever been to, so I'm basing a lot of my build on what I see on Google Earth and what I can find in Google image searches and that sort of thing. So I spent a lot of time on Google just looking around, and I remembered where I grew up downstate. There was a big gravel pit, and I never got like a really good look at it because it was kind of in a ravine. So I looked at it on Google Earth, and man, I couldn't believe what I saw. It's just this big pit in the ground, and lots of construction material and lots of just gravel all over the place. Like nothing was really paved. The roads were just like dirt roads or gravel roads, so it was really nothing special about it in terms of like the type of assets that I would have to use to do this. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. But after doing a little bit of research, I continued on with this. Oh, I should actually back up. I'm already ahead of myself. This build, this area, as with many of the other locations on this section of the Pennsylvania Berwind, this once upon a time was a completed build for the most part. And through several years of updating from 2009 to 2010 to 2012, and then the Trainz assets broke, they got deleted, they got, whatever, updated and that sort of thing. So over time, this area just degenerated. So many of the buildings, actually almost all of the main structure was here. So what I ended up doing was coming in here and adding all of my details and roads and connecting it all together. So some of the main gravel mining assets are probably a little bit dated, and I honestly didn't spend a whole lot of time looking for anything new, and I didn't really want to do that in this episode. Maybe I'll do it off camera, or maybe we'll come back and revisit this in a later episode. But for this one, I wanted to get the general structure down, the layout of the area, and fill in some of this negative space, add some of these parking lots and some of these office buildings and that sort of thing. So that was my goal for this. If better gravel structures come out later on, then I'll update them and we can come back and change things. But anyway, so as I had said at the very beginning, I did struggle getting started with this build, and I've been kind of having a hard time lately with some of this stuff in Trainz. And I think it's one of those things that a lot of people who do YouTube and do like build series go through at one time or another, where you're just kind of cranking out these different designs constantly. Every other week you're doing a different design, a different build for, if it's City Skylines or if it's Minecraft or it's Trainz or whatever other building games are out there, SimCity. Planet Coaster, when you're doing these things, you're coming up with these new ideas, and eventually, it's not that you burn out, and it's not that the game gets old, but for me at least, I start feeling like I'm doing the same thing over and over again, so I'm trying to find new ways to do things. So I'm trying to re-innovate and kind of reinvent the wheel while I'm doing things, and it's not because what I'm doing is bad, it's just because I've gotten so used to it that either A, I've become good at it, so it feels normal, and I don't feel like I'm being very creative because it just happens, or B, you're using the same assets over and over so many times that it feels like you're doing the same thing, but you're not. So that's kind of what has been going through my head for the past couple of weeks, and I've been trying to like refine myself and get back into the game and figure out these builds and stuff like that. And it's just a psychological struggle that I think a lot of people get into, and I'm getting back into it. That's why in the beginning it took me a minute to get started on this build, and then once I got into it, the build really developed on its own, and it took on a life of its own, and I got really into it. And by the end of it, I'm very proud of this build, to be honest with you. I think that it came out really, really great, and so far, I think it's one of my favorite builds, and I feel like I say this pretty frequently, like, wow, this is my favorite build now, this is my favorite build, but I guess that's one of those things that just happens, that just evolves as you're doing more and more stuff. So, anyway, I did struggle to get started with this video and this build, but I'm very happy with how it turned out, and I think you guys will agree once we look at some of the cinematics at the end that it's a pretty neat build, it looks really cool, and running some trains up here is going to be a lot of fun. Alright, the next thing I want to talk about before I have to retire my voice so I can save it for a little bit of the outro, is some of you guys have been messaging me about the paperwork for the original Pennsylvania Berwind, and I've mentioned this in my previous videos. If you're new to the channel, you're new to the series, what I'm doing here is I'm recreating a build that was done several years ago for a very old version of Trainz, and the original creator created basically a whole backstory to this whole map. A script is what I like to refer to it as. And he organized all of the train movements, every town, every industry, and where everything goes, and just everything. And just everything that you can imagine, every story behind every town. Very in-depth. And so his name was Bill M001. I forgot to mention that. I always try to give him a shout out whenever I can. Anyway, Bill, what he had done was created two pieces of paperwork. One was called the P&B Timetable, and the other one was called the P&B Tour, I believe. And these two documents were released along with the route when he originally released it years ago, and it's part of what really, for me, is very magical and enchanting about the P&B. And some of you guys have been asking me where to find these documents, and they've kind of gotten lost over the years over the internet in different pockets of, wherever they were, Mediafire or whatever. But anyway, I have the original documents, and with Bill's permission, I have uploaded them to my website. So I'm going to put a link down in the description below, and I wrote a little blog post about it, and I added the two PDF documents there. So you can take a peek there, and they're not exact at this point. Like, I'm recreating the P&B as best as I can, but it's not an exact replica of the original. And the more, I just read it over recently when I was writing the blog post, and I was like, ugh, I forgot to add this, or I didn't add that, and I have to figure out how I'm gonna cut certain things in. But anyway, it's still a good roadmap for you guys to follow. If you wanna follow along with me in this series, I suggest you go to my website, link below, and take a look at those documents, and you could read through what build I'm building. You can read the backstory of it, what kind of train movements happen there, and how frequently trains go to that location, what the speed limits are, and the rules, etc., etc. So I highly recommend you check that out, because that is the thing that is the piece of paperwork, the piece of literature that really helps bring the P&B to life. It's not just my scenes that I'm building and the things that I do, it's the backstory behind everything that really counts. So there's that. I'll briefly talk for a moment about what I'm doing on the screen here. This part of the build, I wasn't really too sure what to do with this back space, so I thought maybe some kind of a fuel facility would work. So something for the industry to fuel up their trucks. They're gonna get a lot of dump trucks, and big 18-wheeler dump truck style trucks. that would be going in and out of here, and I was just thinking that if this is kind of in a rural location like it is, I'm sorry, I just took some cough medicine. I'm not, I swear. Anyway, they would probably want to fuel up some of their vehicles here and there. So I thought that would be a good location for that, as well as any sort of excavating material or excavators and things like that. So it would be a good spot for that. So it fills up a pretty good spot. Really my main goal, and especially after looking at photos and Google Earth, was to keep this kind of open. I didn't want to congest it too much with too many different buildings and too much busyness. From what I've seen, it looks like these roads are very impromptu and these parking lots are pretty impromptu. Like they kind of evolve as they're needed. And then when they're not needed anymore, they start to get overgrown again. So I wanted to have that feel. So I used a lot of the dry grass and brush and shrubs to kind of punch in and dirty up some of the parking lot areas and that sort of thing. So I think the effect is pretty good, and it works pretty nicely. It fills up the area, and it doesn't look too busy. It still looks really rural, and the effect is good. And a lot of that dry brush, I just love the dry brush. I don't know why. I love that brown, short, dry brush. It just looks so good to me. All right, well, I'm going to end my commentary here just to save my voice for the outro. You guys enjoy the rest of the time-lapse and the music. I think there's another 5 minutes of building to enjoy before we look at some cinematics. Don't miss the cinematics and the outro. See you guys in just a moment.
Put your bad memories to bed. I could be the unsung hero. I could lay the world at your feet. Baby, if you'd lean on me, I'll hold you up for all to see.
Alright guys, well I hope you enjoyed that time lapse and I hope you enjoyed the few cinematics there. I had a lot of fun doing this build and I really liked the way that it came out. I'm really enjoying it, just kind of driving some trains around and just like the way that it looks. Let's take a closer look at it. I am actually in driver mode here, so we'll just take a look real quick. Stop our train. So one thing I noticed, and I didn't mention during the time lapse, part of this video actually got cut off towards the end, and what happened was my hard drive ran out while I was recording, and I didn't realize it. Let me clear the screen here. What am I doing? So yeah, my hard drive filled up while I was recording, and I didn't realize it until I went to stop. So you didn't miss too much, maybe about, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 minutes worth of recording. So it was mostly just filling in some of the scenery around here and down this way. So it wasn't really anything too much, but I do like the way that everything came out. One thing I want to show you guys, and one thing that I noticed while I was having my existential crisis is I've come to realize that my track work is a little bit too neat. Let me pull this train up a little bit more. And so with that in mind, I decided to mess up my track work a little bit. I forgot, somebody at Joan Derail said that my track work was too clean or too sterile or something like that. And I looked at it and I'm like, yeah, you know what, you're right. So I've gone through and kind of just beat up my perfectly parallel sterile track. And I did that by, you can't see it here, but I placed a whole bunch of spline points down along the rails, and I kind of just went back and forth, zigzagged it just a little tiny bit. I didn't go too crazy because I don't want it to be too squiggly, but just enough to make it look like there was some heat kinks and that the rails are very worn, very old, and very used. I dirtied up my what do you call it? Junctions here as well. So they're not perfect. In fact, if you had seen this, if I had seen this in another map, I probably would have been turned off by it because I'm just like, oh, look at that junction. It's not perfectly straight and it's kinked up and blah, blah, blah. But you know what? Deep breath. I think it looks good. When you throw a little bit of, when you do it intentionally, I guess when it's done not intentionally, then it looks like garbage. But when it's done intentionally and you throw some scenery items around it and stuff like that, I think it looks pretty good. And yeah, overall, like I said, I'm pretty happy with the way that this turned out. Not a huge, amount of switching that's got to happen here, but just enough. It's just enough to fill up the tracks and keep you busy. And I guess we'll take a look at the gravel pit down here. We didn't really show that during the time lapse. I did this a long time ago, and it's just an enormous gravel pit. In fact, there would probably be way more rail operation, more tracks and freight cars and stuff going in and out of here than I have. But maybe a lot of it goes out on trucks, who knows. So they hit water over here, they went a little bit too deep, hit the water table. And I did mention it during the time lapse, I saw like these kind of ponds around some of the gravel pits, and I'm imagining them as being some kind of a used for washing, or I don't know, some sort of cleaning, sterilizing something or another, mosquito plant, I don't know. But they seem to be pretty common around these gravel pits, gravel quarries. Actually, I should say it's a quarry because that's what it is. So I wanted to include that. Looks like I got an edge there. I have to clean up just a little tiny bit. But anyway, I wanted to show this to you in live mode because there are so many spline points all over the place, or in driver mode rather, that it was really difficult to see with all the spline points. And I think that's about... Oh, you know what? Last thing I want to mention to you guys that doesn't have to do with this build necessarily is I spoke with Bill M recently, and I'm trying to get him to come in on a live stream, like on a Skype call for like a Q&A sort of thing. We haven't settled on a date or anything like that, but I'm thinking, I haven't mentioned a date yet to him, but maybe New Year's around, not New Year's Eve or New Year's Day or anything like that, but maybe like the Friday, I think New Year's is Sunday, so the Friday or the Saturday before New Year's might be kind of cool. I'm gonna send him a message tomorrow and see if maybe that works. But if you guys are interested in that, I'm gonna try to get him on a live stream, and you guys can check out the P&B documents. Bring your questions, and we'll just have some fun. We'll do some building, or maybe we can actually run some trains with Bill. It'd be kind of neat. But other than that, I've got a lot of work to do on phase 1 to finish it off so I can get a release to you guys. Going through the check boxes, check marks, putting check marks in the check boxes. I think that's what you do. So hopefully that should be coming your way pretty soon. I especially like this scene here. I like this. Pretty neat. Pretty cool. Anyway, that's going to do it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a nice weekend. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.